First Cow podcast.
Cow Podcast, new team.
Here we are.
Yeah.
So, thank you for joining us, Josefine.
Absolutely.
Yeah, wow, that was a little crazy. Sorry. Thank you for joining us. So, as Kurt kind of explained, the Cow Podcast is championing our wellness.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a completely new group here. So, I'm Gian.
I'm Donovan.
I'm Nicola.
And you are?
And I'm Josefine Smith. I'm one of the librarians at Ship Library.
All right.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Yep. So today our topic is about digital wellness and how it can impact student athletes, more specifically just students though. And so we're going to ask you a couple questions today and see what we can come up with. So
Yeah, let's see where the conversation takes us.
So first I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself, what you like to do, and more specifically like what you do here at SHIP.
Sure. So like I said, my name is Josephine Smith. I'm one of the librarians at SHIP. I'm more of the instruction and assessment side, so my work really involves developing curriculum for research skills and research approaches for students. I work a lot with undergrads, but I work with graduate students as well. I'm also liaison to a lot of the social sciences and humanities, so I work a lot with like psych, poli-sci, English, women's studies, variety of departments across campus to kind of help students with the disciplinary focus of their research. But really kind of more broadly, I really care about having students develop skills that give them agency as they navigate this crazy information landscape that we live in.
Yeah.
And then what are things that you do like in your free time? Any other activities that you're involved in or anything?
Well, so I have two little kids, 4 and 7, so my second shift is pretty intense. So there's a lot of like travel soccer happening and dance happening and stuff. One thing that's really awesome about being in academia is that you get to kind of overlay things that you're interested in with your professional life. So my research, separate from information literacy and kind of information access, is looking at the cultural implications of popular romance fiction.
Okay.
And I also read popular romance fiction. So, I mean, I think I'm a stereotypical librarian where I like to read. Give me a cup of hot coffee, get my pumpkin spice latte, and a good
you
book.
two get along well.
Yeah.
The fall's coming around.
Yeah,
Pumpkin
lots
spice.
of beautiful hiking. I really love hiking. Yeah.
If you don't mind me asking, just kind of relating this back to digital wellness, I know you talked about your kids a little bit. What if you have like any rules about like your kids with electronics? Would you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, sure. So, again, librarian. So I do tons of research on like literally every decision that I ever make because I want to make the most well-informed decision. And there's a lot of range in terms of like looking at developmental stages and how that works with electronics and screen time and stuff. One thing that I've heard that I really believe is like once you start doing a thing, it's really difficult to walk it back.
Definitely.
So, if you start cruising your social media at night before bed, it's really hard to stop doing that.
Yeah.
So one of the things that my husband and I do is kind of limit and kind of let things go incrementally. So my 4-year-old does have a Kindle Fire, but she only uses it in the car, only uses it to watch movies. My son doesn't have 7, so he doesn't have any social media at all. He's starting to do more screen time things, so like he'll start to play Xbox. The volume way down, you can't hear what the people are saying. I'm like, I don't want you to be talking to people that you don't know.
Yeah.
And that's, to the kind of digital wellness piece, the one thing that's really hard when you have a computer in your pocket is that you don't know who you're talking to.
Yes.
You don't know what their agenda is. And, as semi-fully formed adults, we can kind of, like, figure some of that out, but it's tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know back at home for me, I think I was able to get my first phone maybe 12. Even then, all my friends had phones back maybe since kindergarten.
Oh,
right?
Yes.
So I was like,
Crazy.
Mom, what is it going to take for me to get my phone? And now that we kind of reach this age, it's like, kind of understand maybe why I wasn't able to have a phone just yet.
Yeah.
Like, the first phone I had was, like, the small one that still had, like, the digits and stuff underneath. So it wasn't even, like, on the internet or anything. And that was such a big step for me to get that, I think, after, like, 4th grade.
Well, and it's a distinction, right? Like, there's a difference between a flip phone,
Yeah.
where you're, like, using it as a phone,
Yeah.
versus, like, the digital kind of wellness piece where it's like when it's a computer that also has social media apps that literally the whole purpose of them is to capture your attention and keep it.
Yeah.
It becomes tricky.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even though it kind of all looks the same.
Yeah, that was my experience also. My first phone that I ever had was one of those like sliding phones that had like the little typing keyboard, and the only numbers that I had were like my friends in the neighborhood and my friends' parents, and it would be like, hey, do you want to go ride our bikes around the neighborhood?
Yeah.
And hey, can so-and-so come outside right now?
yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
All right, well, reeling this back in about the students now, the first question I wanted to talk to you about was how can too much time on electronics hurt students in their academic performance?
So I always like to couch this back in kind of self-awareness and knowing yourself. So, everything is a range or a spectrum of some kind, and you know yourself. So I feel like it's all a question of balance. So I don't think that there's like a set number, but if you think about like when you think about wellness in general, you have all these different elements: social wellness, academic wellness, environmental wellness. Like there's this whole wheel, right? And you can probably see it on the website. But if one area is getting all the attention and at the kind of consequence of everything else, I think that's where it starts to be a real red flag, right? So, figuring out what strategies work for you. I've heard students that put their phone aside, put it in a different room when they're studying, give themselves kind of scheduled breaks where they can go back and look at it. Because, like, the biggest issues when you're thinking about kind of academic success and digital wellness is ultimately you have to be able to focus on something for more than 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's tricky, right? Because, like, as you're scrolling, it's teaching your brain to do things at a quicker pace. So I think for me, the two things are knowing yourself and when it feels good and doesn't, right? That feeling of like when you put the phone down or when you stop like binge watching something on Netflix and you have that moment, like that kind of 5 minutes after you're done where you're like, ugh, and you kind of feel the drop. There's like a drop, right? Yeah. That's the thing to keep alert for because the immediate gratification of like the information high is not going to be the long-term benefit. Yeah. So I feel like, if you need a brain break, everybody needs brain breaks sometimes, right? But you've got to balance it within your own kind of sense of what's going to work for you. And, just making sure that you're doing not just one thing all the time.
Yeah.
No, this completely off script, but something that's like, so when you give yourself those brain breaks, do you have any ideas for maybe ways people can stop, So you've been studying for 15 minutes. You say, let me take 2 minutes on my phone, something like that. Those 2 minutes turn into 10 minutes. Do you have, any advice how to maybe get away from that?
Yeah, so, I think if you notice the parameters you're giving yourself are hard to follow, I would start at the kind of outset changing that. So if you know that if you do 15 minutes of work, if you take a brain break, you can't do a brain break for 2 minutes. You know every single time you're going to spend 5, 10, 15 minutes. I would ratio that with the amount of work.
Okay.
Because typically the threshold to overcome is the picking it up and looking at it, right? Where you're like sitting there, you're looking, and you're like, oh man, there's
Maybe
my
I got a
phone,
message.
there's my phone,
Yeah.
there's my phone, right? But if you like set yourself a timer of how long you're going to work, I'm a big proponent of timers because I need like a hard stop. But so like I feel like if you are able to really assess how much work you need to do and what time span of work helps you to feel productive, then just align it to what's actually going to serve you.
Okay.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Because like generally speaking, especially when it comes to digital wellness and kind of the information, almost like information addiction that we have, right? Like the first grab and look, that's what you have to put off. And if you can quiet it and keep working until it's like at the point where you're, you know, really genuinely needing a walk around. And the other thing you can do is like sometimes if you know that the phone is not going to be a good brain break, do a different brain break. Get up and walk around.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go out and grab a coffee.
Yep. That kind of leads me into like another question I was going to ask. Like, what are some substitutes that you like to do, or some substitutes that you've seen? Like, I know you said you don't like your kids to be on like their electronics before bedtime, because I know that's really important. So, just like some other methods.
Well, and one thing I want to differentiate is like there's a difference between going on your phone for social media, going on your phone for a specific activity like a crossword puzzle, going on your phone to do Candy Crush for 20 minutes or whatever, right? Like one thing I think that's important in digital wellness is trying to differentiate all of the different components of it, because it all looks the same. The thing that's tricky with a phone or with any kind of tablet or device is it all kind of merges together. And the difference between the attention relationship with some apps is different than with others. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
and you probably experience it yourselves. Like the difference between if you're scrolling TikTok and it automatically generates, the whole purpose of some of these these apps are like to catch our attention.
To keep you on them.
Yeah, exactly. So if you know you're not in a time where you are going to be able to have your attention just wander on the path that the app is giving you, don't go in that one. You know, like trying to think about it separate from just like, oh, I'm going to put my phone away and not look at it at all, like almost like an abstinence approach, as opposed to like, oh, well, you know, I really like going on the New York Times app and doing a Wordle or something like that, right? Or like something like that. So, I mean, I think that's one thing, you know, you can differentiate. But going back to the wellness wheel piece, like a lot of times if you move to a different space and not go into the kind of digital space, you won't even think about it once you're there. You know what I mean? So I would say like some things that I do are like go for a walk outside, go grab a drink of water, get a cup of coffee, get a piece of gum or something. Like get out of the space and kind of move around, because a lot of times that's all our attention needs.
Yeah, gotcha. All right, trying to flip this into a little bit more positive. Obviously, digital communications can help students big time. Like right now, we're using Microsoft Word docs and all that stuff, and I just want to get your thought process on how some of this stuff can help students out.
Well, and I think that's where it's like, I don't want to talk about it as like all negative or all positive.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, for every challenge or potential kind of danger that can happen with in a digital landscape, there's 5 other positive things. So, you know, I think just being very aware of and kind of honest with yourself about the strengths and weaknesses of the different resources. So, you know, I think artificial intelligence and generative AI is a great example. Like there are some things that ChatGPT is really cool that it can do, right? But it is not as useful from an academic success perspective to try to cut corners on learning, because that's not really going to serve you in the long term. You know what I mean? Like everybody procrastinates. Everybody's going to have a situation where it's like, oh my gosh, it's last minute. It's not going to be my best work. But like ultimately, if, you know, I think when you're thinking about your digital wellness, thinking about what's going to long-term serve you versus not. So, for example, I'm going to age myself. So I use Facebook a lot. I know. I'm old. But, like, you know, I use Facebook as a way to keep in contact with family that I have overseas. I use Facebook as a community for different groups that I'm part of. There's some really cool artistic things you can do on various media platforms. There's some awesome learning strategies and learning devices for kind of different learning approaches. I know my son uses, and just to go back to him, like, you know, and there's some that my son uses as a 7-year-old that kind of scale up, right? Where they're like having different resources to help you learn about things, having online textbooks that have quizzes embedded and all of this other stuff. Like it really can be a tool. I think it's all a question of what the purpose is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which is a way less black and white answer.
Yeah.
Like, I think most people are like, oh, these are all bad, this is all good.
Yeah.
It depends on how you use it.
I mean, I think like anything else with wellness, it's very much based on who you are and what your needs are.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so all three of us here are athletes on the track and field team, so just wanted to bring that into our world a little bit. So obviously it can help and affect us, as we've learned, like it can with students. But I was wondering, how can social media specifically affect us, like our thought process or like performance?
And do you have any advice on like how to use it around like practice time or around meets?
Yeah, so I think, you know, from when you're thinking about like digital landscapes from like a student athlete perspective, I think there's a lot of really cool connections you can make in terms of like relationships with other athletes.
I know, especially right now, like recruiting.
Yeah.
That's a big thing.
That's what I'm saying. Like, you can connect with groups, people, that type of thing. There's tons of amazing apps to kind of shape and kind of really give you power as an individual to develop your own workouts and kind of manage your own workouts and honestly become more informed as athletes. There's so much more open to you in terms of researching what are things that are going to impact my speed, or what are, you know, what is the physics of this, right? Like, there's so much information at your fingertips, which I think is really, can have a really impactful, kind of powerful space.
Yep.
I know, like, there's a lot of information out there, and sometimes I just feel overwhelmed because there's, like, everybody's like, do this, do that, do this, and it's, like, so many different exercises, and you're like, well, they say this benefits you, and then others say this benefits you, and then it's always, like, how can you figure out what works best for you that you can integrate into your plan and without being overwhelmed?
Well, and I think that this is actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think the downside, right, everything is positive and a negative. I think the downside piece is that until you're an expert in whatever sport or whatever field you're in or discipline, like, you know, it could be the athlete side, it could be the student kind of academic side. The thing that's tricky is evaluating and sorting, right? So, like, you can learn some things, but at the end of the day, there are going to be moments where, you know, talking to people who are more established in the sport is going to be really helpful. And, you know, one of the things that's really hard kind of as a thing as athletes to kind of keep in mind is, like, the comparison problem. Where, like, you want it to support and help you grow, but when it shifts, and again, this is requiring some self-awareness on your part. So I feel like everything for me comes back to kind of developing your own internal awareness and, like, ability to be honest with yourself and not just, oh, this feels good right now, or I don't feel like doing that, and just kind of checking in with yourself. Because, like, if you start to look at everything and you're starting to feel bad about yourself, or, like, your time, whatever metric you're using as success, that yours doesn't match up against somebody else's, you don't want to be in that space as an athlete. Like, that's not going to help you succeed. So, like, you know, recognizing when is the moment to step away because your wellness is being affected.
Yeah, so, like, do you kind of feel like overconsumption of, you know, maybe, like, different training philosophies, stuff like that, that can kind of like help ruin your identity
Yeah.
as an athlete.
100%. So here's what I'll say. Like, there are going to be strategies that work.
Yeah.
Right? And you can develop that. But like anything else, it's a balance, right?
Yeah.
Some of it's going to come from kind of self-generated stuff. Some of it is going to come from your peers and what is working for them in real time. Some of it is going to come from your coaching staff and what the growth areas they're wanting to see. And then some of it is going to come from kind of the context, kind of external factors of like, what kind of meets are coming up? What's the weather in your area, right? Because the student athletes at SHIP are going to be different than student athletes in different areas, right? So like if you're going to college at SHIP and maybe you live a couple states over, and so maybe the resources are different in your like hometown or whatever. I mean, again, it's like a question of balance. So I wouldn't rely too heavily on any one thing.
Yeah.
Find your own identity.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's a good motto.
Yeah, and use that to kind of navigate the digital landscape.
I like that.
And back to the like performance at meets, or like you can even like use it for students before an exam. How would do you have any advice on how to use social media leading up to something like that?
I like that. That's a good question.
That's a good question. Can I put a question back on you?
Of course.
How do you use it?
See, I feel like it always depends on the day, but like sometimes before meets, I just like to like scroll through it to just like distract, and then some other days I try to avoid it.
Yeah.
So
it really depends on the headspace you're in, the context of the meet, all of the vibes. I think that makes sense, and kind of assessing what you need to do. Like, does it psych you out to look at other people doing the same things that you're doing? If so, then probably don't do that, right? Instead, scroll through TikToks about cute kitties or something, like whatever you need to like get in the mode, right? Or if it's like not going on an app and listening to music instead, like open it. I mean, it's still an app, but
I know for sure some of my friends on the academic side, they'll stay off their phones all day. They'll listen to music all day, and they feel like if they're on any type of social media or if they're getting any type of distractions or like I can't focus. Versus me on the flip side, you could catch me scrolling on my phone all day.
I'm the same way.
Right? Like that I use that as a decompressor almost.
Yeah, and I mean I think that again goes to like your own thing. If you feel like it's serving you, right, and there's not a long-term negative consequence or short-term negative consequence, then I don't see it. I'll say this. I think that some of the fear around social media is not that different from past technological advancement fears, where we're still kind of figuring it out. And there's things that are good and things that are bad. And I feel like as long as students are going into that space aware that a lot of the spaces on their phone or in their kind of digital landscape have motives that they need to be aware of, then you go in knowing what you're doing, right? The same way that, like, if you're 18 and you buy a pack of cigarettes, nicotine is addictive. So it's kind of a decision that you're making.
Well, I know me personally, I'm more of a music guy myself, like pre-meets, pre-test. I bet my Apple Music hours are through the roof because I really, it's like one of my favorite things to do. I think it's a big part of who I am, and it's how I get focused also. Like whatever I'm doing, if I'm having trouble, just like anything, like studying, or if I'm having like troubles with myself, one of my big getaways is music, and I think it helps me out a lot.
Interesting question. I mean, I'll go around the table here, but maybe you have a big test coming up. What kind of music are you listening to? All right.
Are you starting with me?
Yeah. Start with you.
When I have my choice, I'm probably listening. I'm listening to 90s R&B.
Okay.
Okay.
Like I'll listen to like some Brandy, some Monica, TLC.
Yeah,
like,
it's solid. I like that. Nicola?
For a long time, like when I came here my freshman year, I listened to a lot of German music while I was studying to, like, I guess feel more connected to home or something. And now recently I just, like, I usually go back to, like, my favorite songs and stuff. Something that I know well that can, like, be in the background that I can, like, blend in and out as I go.
It honestly depends on what I'm doing. Like, my pre-meet music is not going to match up with, like, my pre-test music. Like, I know I got to have music that'll, like, get me going if I'm sitting at a meet. So I listen to, like, a lot of rock. Kickstart My Heart by Motley Crue is my go-to. I mix in some rap every now and then, too, but...
I like that, though, the idea that different moments, because it's true. Like, if I'm having to drive really far, like, I'll probably listen to, like, Cake or something, because the vibe feels like a driving vibe. I don't know.
See, driving for me is like a country music kind of thing.
Me too.
Oh, man.
It's like the good old on the road
I have
again.
zero ability at country music.
Really?
Nothing. Yes, and I'm
Me
even
neither.
from this area. It's terrible.
I just got into it. My friend, he told me, like, my senior year of high school, he was like, man, you got to start listening to country music, and I haven't turned back on it now. It's probably what I listen to the most, honestly.
Yeah, it's my greatest trivia weakness.
You were singing out your soul before we came here.
I
actually.
was.
You were singing
On
out
the
your
walk
soul.
over.
Nice.
Yeah.
What about
Me,
yourself, Gian?
I'm country music probably all the way.
Nice.
I never really enjoyed it, but one of my friends put me onto it, and what he said to me, and it always stick with me. You have to listen to all genres to truly enjoy music. So
You want to have that balance.
yeah, right. I've 17 different playlists on my phone.
Oh, yeah.
All different genres, music, artists, you name it. I got it.
Nice.
So staying at the topic of music, based on your research, have you heard anything about, like, certain genres or something helping you focus? Because I know there's, like, I'm not sure if it's a myth or if it's, like, certified by studies that, like, a lot of people like to listen to, like, classic music as they study.
Funny enough,
I've heard
Everything
jazz.
like that.
Jazz,
Yeah,
is
like,
a big one.
stuff like that where I'm not sure if it's a myth or if it's, like, true.
Soothing music.
I mean, so here's the thing.
The Mythbuster.
I'm not trying to bust any myths, but here's what I'll say. There are a variety of research projects that in one context, or research studies that in a specific context, certain things might impact certain people, certain types of people's kind of cognitive processes. For a conversation about that, you'd probably want to have, like, a psychology professor come on here and talk to you. What I will say is different people's brains work differently. So I think that it is unlikely that there's one genre that across the board for every single person will make them focus better.
Find something that works for you, like you said earlier.
Yeah. So I'll say that. I mean, you know, and I think there's a developmental piece. Like, we're talking about stuff that's very specific to, like, emerging adults, which is kind of the phase of life that y'all are in. You know, your brains are very different than, like, kids, for example. So.
Yeah. All right, well, moving on now, we're going to do the Chat GPT segment. It's been a pretty good staple here in the Cow podcast from what I've heard. So the first prompt that I put in was similar to the first the first couple of questions that I asked you. The first one was, how can too much time online affect students? And what it gave me was it can affect your mental health, academic performance, it can disrupt your sleep, social skills, physical health, and attention span. And so I wanted to kind of, like, compare and contrast it to like what you said, I guess, and then see if you have anything you wanted to add or myth bust. Or
No, I mean, I think, you know, I think overall that's probably generally true. You know, if you look at the roots behind, from a digital wellness perspective, like sleep health and what the impact of, like, blue light is on your circadian rhythm. I mean, there's all these different kind of research avenues you can go down to verify some of that stuff. I think, you know, like some of the things we talked about with the athletics and social media, you know, it can have a negative impact on mental health. I guess for me, I think it's all kind of, again, back to, like, your situation in your life.
Yeah.
And how, from a research, I'm a librarian, so everything's from a research perspective, thinking about the anecdotal kind of experience of you in the larger spectrum of like kind of established best practice, if you will. So like if you're feeling like something's not working, right? You don't know what, but something's not working, I don't want anybody to feel too much pressure of like they have to figure it out for themselves. I think that's a moment where you read some research, read some different kind of news articles, reports, that kind of thing, about what are some other things that people do or what are some things that impact these different areas. Like if you know that you're not getting enough sleep and you wonder why.
Yeah.
And you are seeing stuff about, screens can impact sleep, then do some research on it and see where you come out. It's more responsibility for you as individuals to have all the pressure, kind of the responsibility of making that decision on you.
Yeah.
Right? So it requires you to not just be self-aware, but be ready to kind of go and find information to be better or to have a better situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I like that. All right. So to the second prompt that we put in, it's how can digital communication benefit students? So what it came up with, are collaboration, access to resources, networking, flexibility, improved engagement, social development, inclusivity. Oh, I like that, inclusivity.
Skill development.
Skill development, yeah.
It's small font.
What did I say?
You said
Social.
social.
Oh, skill development.
Hey, both of them
Probably
fit.
social.
Both of them
Both
fit.
fit, and
right?
also all of those things were things that we talked about
Yeah.
Yeah.
in some way, shape, or form.
Yes.
So, you have anything else to add on that kind of?
ChatGPT did us good.
No, I think for
once,
that
yeah.
one, it's I think it's still good. I mean, it goes back to like you want to make sure that it's like really serving you, and I think the thing that's not a good or a bad thing, but I think it's just easier to kind of see some of the strengths when you're using it all the time, and I think that's why people who are nervous about it tend to focus on the negative because the positive stuff is really clear.
Yeah.
Right? Like, nobody's going to be like, oh, why does it feel so good to randomly scroll on my phone? Nobody's like, oh, that's terrible, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
it's a thing that people do for fun, but it's like, the question of the other side of it.
It's hard to find.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
hard to find.
Fine line.
So something that I kind of found interesting is that, like, how we talked about it's all what works for you today. I really thought that was interesting, whether
Common
it,
theme, yeah.
right? So, like I said it before, but it kept going through my own mind is find your own identity, right? Like, so do what works for you. Some things might not work out for you in the end.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that you might do, or that he might do, or that you might do that won't work out for me in the end.
All those myths
Yeah, right?
that are out there
Yeah.
might not work for you.
So I think an important thing is to, like you said, navigate your way through the digital world that we have today.
And I think that ChatGPT said, information access. We have access to all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
We just have to kind of figure out what's actually going to serve us and not be afraid to like pull from all of our different communities,
Yeah.
not just the phone itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
I
just
like that.
have to be aware of the pros and cons at all times.
Yep.
And as long as we do that, I think we should be good.
No pressure or anything.
Yeah.
Definitely
No
not.
pressure.
All right.
Well, unless anything on your mind, anyone?
I think I'm good.
I think we're about ready to wrap this up. Well, thank you, Josefine, for joining us on the podcast. It was a
Yes.
pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're our first
thank
guest
you.
with the new crew.
First guest, new
Nice.
crew.
Mhm.
It was a good time. So
Yeah.
Well, and if you guys ever need research help, let me know.
absolutely,
We
we'll
will,
let you know.
absolutely.
All
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.